Assistant Superintendent, and Travis Campbell, Director of K-12 Education, for providing this opportunity for all of us to learn about the Indistar program. So I'll turn it over to Andy and Travis, and away we go.
Great. Well, first off, we are super happy to have this opportunity with you today to share a little bit with you about how we do our work with schools in the field. The GoToMeeting webinar that we're going to do today is really broken up into a couple of parts. The beginning piece is going to be just some background information, the first 10 slides or so, and then when we get done with that portion of the presentation, we will pause and take any questions about sort of the general part of the presentation, and then we're actually going to dive into the Indistar tool and actually take you via the technology into the tool and pretend that we're a virtual school that's actually creating a student and school success action plan. So we'll actually model for you exactly the way we would use this tool if, for example, I was working like I did last week with an elementary school in Tacoma. So without further ado, we're going to advance the slides, and we want to start off just by sort of sharing what Indistar is and what Indistar is not. Indistar is not a silver bullet that if we shoot it accurately or enough times is going to heal the schools in Washington State. The only thing that's going to make a difference in the long run for our schools in Washington State is principals doing a better job principaling and teachers doing a better job teaching. At the end of the day, that's where it all comes down. What Indistar is it's an online planning tool that allows us to use the best national research that we have about school improvement and really leverage that research in a way that we're able to record the narrative about what's happening in the school over time so we can adjust and reflect, accelerate practices or change practices based on what's being successful or not being successful. So throughout the presentation today, you'll hear Travis and Nate and I refer to indicators. And what those indicators are embedded in the tool. It's really the best research-based of observable behavioral actions that teachers can do, principals can do in schools to transform their schools. There's an absolute research alignment within the Indistar tool about what those indicators are. Indistar was initially commissioned by the state of Virginia to support their underperforming schools and funded by the U.S. Department of Education. And right now, across the United States, approximately 27 different states are using Indistar in a similar way to the way Washington is. We're the only state, to my knowledge, that's using it consistently across all of our identified priority focus and then our 6 schools as well. Tons of capacity in Indistar that you'll get to see today, lots of research and supports that are there for principals to guide the work in their buildings. Also lots of capacity to really publicly examine the work that's going on in schools. And one of the pieces that we like about Indistar is if we think about the history of school improvement planning in Washington State, I'll go back to when I started as a principal in the Clover Park School District back in 1998. We had to do a school improvement plan, but it was essentially housed in a 3-ring binder. I sent a copy to OSPI, but I'm not sure who looked at it or what they did with it. And essentially after that binder was created, it became an artifact that my supervisor held and that sat on a shelf in my office. And what we know is that sort of a process just isn't iterative enough or real life enough to actually change anything. And so what Indistar allows us to do is to create a cyclical process of assessing those indicators, creating a plan that makes sense, and then monitoring that plan over time. It's really about continuous improvement planning. One of the best pieces that I appreciate about Indistar is the transparency of the tool. There's a ton of opportunity for multiple people to weigh in and engage in the tool as well as leave feedback in the tool, and Nate and Travis are going to show you a little bit more of that down the road. This just gives you another visual picture of how the process works. All of our recently identified schools are right now in the process of selecting their teams. We're working to help them analyze their data, and then we'll begin over the next several weeks to assess their current practice, create the action plan, and all of our newly identified schools plans are due October 30th.
The Indistar account types, there are a number of accounts that offer different levels of access to the school as well as district's plan. Where the rubber meets the road, as I refer to it, is the school level. The school team has access to their bank of 132 rapid improvement indicators, all of the functionality to assess those indicators, craft their plan, and implement their plan. Reporting functionality, we'll look at some of that here in a moment. We'll actually log into a school's account. The district account provides the same functionality, providing districts access to district-level indicators that align to school-level indicators to help support the turnaround efforts occurring at the school level, as well as some administrative functionality that allows the district to monitor progress and provide feedback to any school in the district that's using the tool. The coach level, both student and school success coach and ESD lead account provides our coaches and our colleagues at each ESD the ability to provide coaching support and monitoring of the school and district's plan in their region. And then finally at the state level, we have the ability to monitor progress with read-only access to all schools and districts' plans, as well as use some of the not only the monitoring functionality, but the feedback functionality embedded within the tool to provide ongoing feedback.
Great, thanks, Nate. This is Travis. The next slide has posted here the 7 turnaround principles. That's an interchangeable term. We also call them the student and school success principles. These are the same 7 principles that are articulated within E2 SSB 5329 within the legislation that has recently updated the whole piece around RAD 2 and RAD. And so each of the indicators that Andy spoke to previously and that Nate was just referring to falls within each of one of these turnaround principles. And you'll note there that they each have kind of a focus. Principle 1 around providing strong leadership. That focuses not only on the role of the principal as a leader to provide instructional, a focus on instructional improvement and student learning outcomes, but also the leadership teams, the distributed leadership, the teacher leadership within the building that's working collaboratively around the iterative change process. The second principle focuses specifically on ensuring teachers are effective and able to improve instruction, and so there are a number of indicators there that focus specifically on those behaviors and practices that Andy referred to earlier around that are measurable and observable.
And Travis, I would jump in just for a moment to say to the State Board, several of you have really clearly articulated your desire for us to really lead with strength around the quality of the principals and the quality of the teachers. And I would just give you a couple of specific examples. These are the 2 principles, Principle 1 and Principle 2, that when we partner with districts around either providing additional support and or removing an underperforming principal, this is what we leverage as Principle 1. Just yesterday I met with a school district in our state to talk with the district about how we could support them to ensure that overaged and perhaps underqualified teachers weren't placed in our identified schools. So we're aggressively working with the associations around the state as well and the districts to try and just provide guidance so that we meet each of these turnaround principles in each of the schools and districts that we serve.
Great. And just to kind of follow through with that, Principle 3 is specifically looking at expanded learning time and also expanded time for teacher collaboration, which is a critical component as well. When we think of strong instruction or effective instruction in the classroom, we're referencing Principle 4, and this often is where you see a lot of linkages to the instructional frameworks, etc. 5 is the use of data to inform instruction, which is a really critical element that many of you may have noted in some of the RAD reports, the audits that came in. Some of them referenced this particular principle and the need for using student learning data to inform instructional decisions and program decisions. 6 is around safe and supportive school environments, and so we find a lot of our multi-tiered systems of support falling within Principle 6, such as PBIS, etc. And then last but certainly not least, engaging families in the community. So these constitute the 7 kind of pillars or principles that work to guide schools. And it's important to note that one of the expectations common to all schools, including our SIG schools, our RAD schools, and our priority and focus schools, is that they have one what we call active expected indicator under each of these 7 turnaround principles, so that they have one big goal, one primary goal that is pushing that particular principle and that initiative forward. The next slide that we're going to transition to touches upon some of the language that we've been using around indicators. Andy referenced it earlier. Indicators are those rapid improvements and evidence-based practices. At both the district and school level, you'll note that at the district level, these indicators are more about policies, practices, procedures, and resources that are focused on the change process to support the schools in the work at the building level. At the building level, you'll notice that those indicators are really best practices. These are behaviors that are observable and measurable and are organized by the turnaround principles. Each of these, as Andy referenced earlier, has a piece of research associated to it. Those are called wise ways. And under each indicator within the tool, and Nate will demonstrate this, you can click on a hyperlink immediately underneath each of the indicators, and it'll pull up a white paper, a research brief, if you will, on the specific evidence-based practices that support that particular indicator. So if schools were struggling with making meaning or sense-making around what that means, for example, schools use data to inform instruction, this particular white paper would inform them around that. The bottom part, the bottom paragraph there speaks to something called expected indicators. And expected indicators are 17 indicators for schools that we have identified as particularly high leverage actions that align to the turnaround principles, the spirit of the turnaround principles. It's important to note, like for Principle 1, providing strong leadership, the definition of the turnaround principle really is about ensuring that the principal has the turnaround capacity to move the needle within that building. And we have particular expectations around what that looks like. So the indicator language matches specifically with the language of the definition of that particular turnaround principle. Schools, as I said before, are expected to have one of these expected indicators at a minimum under each of the 7 turnaround principles. And in the case of RAD schools, there were several potentially additional indicators that were identified through the audit process, identified for the school to process and produce SMART goals around, in addition to the expected indicators that they may be working on.
Thanks, Travis. And I would point out to the board members at this time that we tried to be very intentional in the guidance that came from the external audit report. And the feedback that I've given the schools at this point is that as they prepare for their presentation to you on July 9th, what we are going to expect, what you're going to be expecting them as a board to do, is speak specifically to each one of the recommendations that were made in the external audit and respond based on which indicator they're going to plan for and why they believe, what's the evidence-based practice that assures both you all as a state board and me as the director of this division that their actions over the next year are actually going to get the needle moving in the right direction instead of the wrong direction. This next slide that Nate has populated for us gives you an example of what one of the indicators are. The first piece of text you see on the screen in front of you right now is the principle. So this references Principle 5 that was a couple of slides ago about using data to inform instruction for continuous improvement. The 2 expected indicators that our office has provided the field under Principle 5 are the 2 that are noted in the right-hand column. And the reason why I point all three of these pieces out together is it's a great example of just sort of, I think, the practicality of the indicators. And I think it'll also be maybe somewhat surprising that what looks on the surface to be sort of simple and kind of a no-brainer is actually quite complex. And so if I was the principal of a building and I was thinking through which one of these indicators I was going to plan for in my building, I would want to look at my data and where we were at with the school, and then really create a consensus with my faculty around which one of these indicators would have the most aggressive response in student achievement first, or the quickest, or in the most robust fashion. And I think that's the piece, as we've had dialogue between our office and the state board around the degree of prescriptiveness that we provide versus the degree of coaching. This discussion about how these indicators will look in each building is really different based on the DNA of the building we're working in, the expertise and skill of the principal that's leading, and the data in each of the schools. Let's focus in for just a second on the second indicator here that's listed, P5IID12. It reads, all teachers monitor and assess student mastery of standard-based objectives in order to make appropriate curriculum adjustments. So the process a principal would take their school through is really first to try to flush out what that language means. And one of the things I love about the language in Indistar is that it never talks about some or most of the teachers or only the teachers that want to. It's always very, very clear that this is an all or nothing expectation. We want all teachers to monitor and assess student mastery. As one of the things that we coach in our office principals to do is to really break down the language in each of these indicators and help their staff make sense of that. So you can see here, for example, that when it talks about all teachers monitoring, assessing student mastery of standards-based objectives, that statement makes an assumption that the whole school is operating based on standards-based objectives. So one of the questions I would coach the principal to ask their staff is, do we have standards-based objectives in every single classroom? How do we measure the student mastery of those standards-based objectives? This whole indicator opens a huge can of worms because if schools, for example, are using sort of the old 90% A, 80% B, 70% C grade scale, where you get points for not using your bathroom passes and coming to class on time, that sort of point tally doesn't necessarily tell you whether the standards have been met or not. And so by breaking these indicators down really, really deliberately, it allows us to really get deep with principals and teachers about something that seems on the surface like, oh, that's a good educational statement we can all agree with. It's very, very much more complicated to really get deep into that indicator. The other interesting piece about this particular indicator is many times when we're in the field and we talk with teachers about their work, we talk about their upcoming lesson plans, their reflection is that, you know, maybe they've done a great job identifying their targets and they've done a good job of backwards planning. Frequently, teachers haven't thought about how they're going to assess student mastery on a day-to-day basis and adjust the curriculum and instruction based on what happens today for tomorrow. So the other place this indicator allows us to do is to really dig deep with teachers into their daily classroom practice around, at the end of this period, fourth period algebra class, what exactly was it that you wanted every child to know and be able to do? That's in alignment with the Common Core state standards. How did you check what every child knows and is able to do? And then how do you use that data on a day-to-day, class-to-class basis to inform what happens tomorrow in the classroom? And the first time, I had this discussion last week with an elementary school in Tacoma and had an interesting dialogue with teachers where they said, gosh, that's so much detail and precision. How could we possibly do that? And my question back to them sort of rhetorically was, how in the world would you know what to do tomorrow if you don't know exactly how many kids met the standards today? And so that gives you just a little snippet in terms of the coaching and thinking as we start to unpack these indicators with principals and teachers in the field.
Great, thanks, Andy. The next step, once the principal works through the process of running through a consensus with faculty and selecting indicators, is to develop some specific SMART goals within the tool. The tool, as you'll see here shortly, provides an opportunity for the process manager, whoever's inputting the information, to put some text in around the current level of development, which is an opportunity for the team to really take a sober look at data and to record exactly where they are with regard to their sense making in relation to the indicator. And then they are asked to develop kind of how it will, it's called how it will look when fully met. And this is synonymous for us with a SMART goal. And so as we've worked with school staffs and districts around developing SMART goals, we always provide them kind of the Reader's Digest version of it, that they articulate both evidence supporting the strategy and the measurable outcomes for students and educators. And we kind of run through the acronym itself, which you see there on the screen. We also offer a logic model or a logic statement that you see on the bottom of the screen. As they go through the development of their SMART goal, we guide them with some language around, if we do, then we impact, that results in. And that helps, as a former English teacher, kind of frame that with those sentence stems to provide the structure for focusing their work around actions that have impacts and then ultimate outcomes and results. Those are the pieces there, and I believe a little later on we're going to show you some live examples of these.
Thank you, Travis. Our office has developed and published two handbooks specifically to help guide and support the process. The first is the Action Planning Handbook, Guide for School Teams, and it's essentially a tool for schools and their districts to examine ways they can most effectively increase educator capacity and improve student achievement. Use the Indistar Action Planning tool to assess, create, implement, monitor, and revise their student and school success action plan, as well as, if applicable, use Indistar to integrate their Title I school-wide plan with their action plan. The second book that we most recently created is a RAD guidance handbook, and it describes exactly what districts need to do to satisfy requirements of required action districts, as well as to exit the required status. It's also a handbook, or this handbook is intended to clarify our intention that districts identified for required action build upon their current student and school success action plan when addressing the concerns raised in the academic performance audit report.
And I would just add, Nate, that certainly any of the board members that would like to review these documents, these are both found on our website. You can go to the Student and School Success website, and these links are found over on the left-hand corner of that website, or you can email Nate or I directly, and we can get those to you if you're interested in seeing that level of detail.
And the PowerPoint, both of the headers here link directly to the respective book. Finally, we created the RAD book as a companion to the Action Planning Handbook, and again, it's the hope that leadership teams would use both documents as they address the required action district requirements and revise their student and school success action plan in light of those audit report findings.
Just wanted to give you a picture of the timeline for our identified schools, and Nate, I'll just go ahead and let you populate this whole piece. This shows both the combination of where we're at with the RAD process and the overall priority and focus process as well. I think the thing that's most important on here to note is that we really have tried to systematize the reporting check-in points. I mentioned earlier when I served as a principal, we created my plan and I was never quite sure when it would be reviewed or when I would get feedback. We have 3 points annually that plans are due for revision, October 30th, February 28th, and May 30th. Every single time that the plans are submitted, the plans are reviewed and critiqued by either someone here in our office or one of our contract staff that has technical expertise around the school improvement process. And so, huge shift from the past where principals created their plans largely as a compliance document in their buildings. These plans now are part of the ongoing conversation that we're having statewide about what's working in schools and what's not working in schools. So now's the most exciting part. Nate loves this. We're going to actually dive into the Indistar tool, and as Nate is getting that teed up on the screen, one of the cool parts about this tool from my perspective is that it provides a platform for multiple users to gain access to the real day-to-day work of the school improvement plan. So as Nate logs us in, schools can log in and access this, districts, educational service districts. We have several school boards around the state that are actually monitoring their school improvement plans for their entire district using this platform. Hot links on websites. And as a matter of fact, one of the interesting things as we think about opening up the transparency specifically to RAD status is that it's our goal that every time we share an update with you as a State Board of Education, that we won't be producing yet another report for you all, but we'll actually be able to actually taking you into the school's plans and showing you the progress that's been made and how we're monitoring those plans. So Nate, take it away. Take us on a little Indistar tour.
Sure, absolutely, Andy. Just very quickly, we're logged into a demo account here. This is exactly what a school sees when they first log in. This is their dashboard. And it, among other things, it provides access into what I refer to as the heart of the tool, where the team, that iterative process of accessing and assessing those rapid improvement indicators, crafting a plan for those assessed indicators, and then implementing their plan. On the dashboard, there are some other key features that I want to point out, and that is the document upload feature that allows the school team and the district team on their respective account to upload supplemental evidence. So we have a number of schools, SIG schools, schools that are Title I school-wide schools that are integrating their school-wide plan, even districts in support of those district-level expected indicators, using this feature to upload that supplemental evidence that's accessible by all.
Well, and I want to jump in here for just a second, Nate, to say, you know, another way that we're holding schools accountable, as we talked about that indicator related to leadership in the school, one of the things that this year we asked superintendents and districts to do was to upload evidence about why they believed that the principal leading the charge was actually prepared to lead the charge. And it was a fascinating dialogue that ensued. Most folks, if they had made the decision about who their principal was going to be based on, you know, their principal's resume or training or previous experience, they were really easy and could answer that question. But we had some folks, district leaders, who called our office and said, you know, what if we're not sure that the principal in the chair can lead the work? Which then gave us a great opportunity to really push on the system and say, you know, if we're not sure that the people you have in charge of these underperforming schools can lead the work, then we need to partner together and get somebody else in charge of those schools. So it was a great way, using this evidence collection process, to really push the expectations on who the people are leading each of our schools.
The other piece that I wanted to point out here on the dashboard is the Docs and Links feature, which is a tab. We really embraced this tab as our repository for all of the supports and materials that we've developed along the way to help support school and district teams. And you'll see there's a significant amount of content on the screen, but everything from a requirements and timelines document that summarizes by submission date what's due and how to do it, to a frequently asked questions document that was developed to help support districts in their development and implementation of their district plans, to how-to guides conveying how to perform the key functionality, key features, or use the key features to implement and modify their plan, even links to pages on our handbook, our website rather, such as the handbook. So we really embrace this tab and as that one-stop shop for schools and districts to find all the resources that they like. Should we dive into the heart of the tool?
Let's dive in, Nate.
Okay. So back into the Home tab. Clicking on the Indicators tab, and now we're in what I refer to as the heart of the tool, and that iterative process of assessing, creating, and monitoring. Just to briefly explain what we see here, there's access to the 132 indicators. The 17 expected indicators that we talked about earlier are associated to a filter, as are the Title I school-wide plan corresponding indicators that allow the school team to easily pull those indicators up. Once an indicator is assessed, it's updated and moved, if you will, to the create phase where the team can access and craft a plan around it. Once that plan is crafted, it is then accessible in the monitor phase where the team can modify that plan, and then implement that indicator.
And I think what's interesting to point out to the board, Nate, is the little snapshot box on the right-hand side of the screen is super, super useful. And we talk to district leaders frequently about using this snapshot box as a way to quickly check the progress of the schools that they're supervising. This would also be a great way for the state board to check in on the progress that the RAD schools are making. And what you can't see here is the specific changes that have happened that may lead to student achievement gains. What you can see is, are they on track? Are they doing what they've said they would do? Are they following their plan? Are they implementing their tasks? And it gives us, again, a running narrative so that either if they're doing all the work and it's not getting better, then it allows us to have sort of the diagnostic questioning process to go in and really probe and see why things aren't getting better. Or if they're not behind, it gives us a really solid accountability metric to really push on the school around the timelines and expectations, because we all have a sense of urgency about things getting better in these schools for our kids.
We're currently logged into an account that's yet to be used in our demo accounts, but if we pulled up any school's account, we could see this information populated, the last update that was made within each of these phases, as well as the progress made, and if any indicators were past due or task past due, we would see that, and then it would also provide us the ability to drill down into a report to pull up those indicators or tasks. The last piece I wanted to mention, or the last key piece, if you will, of the tools under the navigation toolbar, we see a number of icons that provide us access to features, including a significant number of reports that help report on, such as a task report, a progress implementation report, even an indicator checklist report that allows the team to identify key indicators and export them into a custom report to share with their school board or parents or individuals external to the leadership team. Travis mentioned wise ways. I wanted to just briefly touch upon that before we jump in and take a look at an indicator. Throughout the tool, or I should say that each of the 132 rapid improvement indicators has a wise ways associated to it. And essentially it links the indicator to a synthesis of related research, examples, and resources to aid the school team as they assess, plan for, and implement an indicator. And just to quickly pull up what that might look like, and these are embedded throughout the tool as a school team assesses an indicator, as they begin crafting a plan for the indicator. Just to quickly drill down to demonstrate that. Well, here's a list of all of those indicators by turnaround principle. Principle 1 around strong leadership is listed first. And then the school team has, here in this view, amongst others, direct access to the wise ways, that white paper research that Travis was talking about to help support the assessment and implementation of the indicator.
And I like to joke, Nate, with principals sometimes that, sometimes in the back of the staff room lounge, when principals are working, there might be a teacher who would say, well, how do we know that this is really an important thing to do? Or who says this is an important function to have in schools? And so what's great is if we can click on the Wise Ways document, and it right away pulls up an expansive research brief that really provides a frame for the principal to guide the dialogue with the staff. So it's not essential that the principal is the expert researcher, because the expert research has already been done and is here to support the school improvement process.
Okay, get back to the main page here. And do we want to demonstrate assessing an indicator?
Yeah, let's do that, Nate. Let's pretend for a moment, State Board, that I'm going to pretend that I am lucky enough to be your principal and that you're all teachers in our outstanding school. And we're going to make a choice to take a look at, why don't you scan down to Principle 4, Nate? And let's just, for grins, pick units of instruction include pre-test and post-test to assess student mastery. Let's not do that one, only because it's not an expected indicator. Let's scroll up. Let's do this one down here, Nate.
Sorry.
All teachers differentiate assignments. Okay, so as we think about this, and if you can imagine for a second that you're a teacher in one of our identified schools, if I was facilitating this process with you as my faculty, this is where we would start. We would actually have this tool live in our meeting. We would go into the tool, and I would start the conversation by doing what we did a little bit earlier in terms of breaking down the language. So we would spend some time talking about this indicator that reads all teachers differentiate assignments in response to individual students' performance on pre-tests and other methods of assessment. So one of the things that I would point out to folks is that this assumes that no teachers start teaching new content without having some way of knowing what the kids already know about that subject. So we would never ever find ourselves in a U.S. history class with the teacher just beginning the lecture about the beginning of the United States without first checking to see what the kids know and using that pre-test information to inform instruction. Once I had broken down the language of the indicator, we would, as a faculty, make some consensus decisions. And when I say as a faculty, we give our schools a couple of options. Some schools choose to do this activity that I'm describing right now with their entire staff. Other schools choose to do this activity with a representative body, a building leadership team. And either strategy can work based on the makeup of the school and the skill of the principal. Once we flushed out the words in the indicator, then we would go to number 1 where it says choose your level of development or implementation for this indicator. So this is really just us doing a gut check as a staff about what does this indicator look like in our building right now? Are all teachers differentiating in assignments? And I would probably use a fist of 5 or some easy thumb up, thumb sideways, thumbs down consensus model where I would get every staff member to engage and give me feedback on this. Most likely, this is not going to be fully implemented. And so let's say for the purposes of our discussion that the staff says that there's limited development or implementation. Some teachers are doing this, but certainly not all. Then the next question to ask would be number 2 and number 3. So priority score. Priority score is just how important is this to us? And probably you shouldn't be fiddling with it if you picked it as a 1. So let's assume that we say as a staff this is a 3. It's really important to us. Opportunity score really refers to how hard is this going to be to pull off. And we coach schools that they should only plan for an indicator that is either a 3 or a 2. If they get to this place in the process and whatever their action is going to be would require board policy, we require the principal to work, we encourage the principal to work with the superintendent on the side on that. Nothing worse than a faculty going through and creating a plan that they don't have the power to implement. So we want to make sure it's within their sphere of control. Let's say that we would select a 2 here, accomplished within the current policy and budget conditions, which takes us down to box number 4, describe the current level of development or implementation. And so schools do this in different ways, but we would want to look at some data in our school. We don't want people just saying how they feel or what they think. We want people using some concrete examples. So the principal may have some survey data that suggests that less than 50% of the school is actually doing this. So what we may put in this box, and if Nate would be my scribe, is we may say currently at our school, less than 50% of our teachers differentiate assignments in response to individual students' performance. Period. And then we would, maybe there's another statement that says many teachers do not use pre-tests before launching new instruction. And maybe one more sentence might say, we as a school don't yet have a common way of assessing what all kids know and are able to do that informs our practice. Now, I just shared with you a narrative that a school might come up with. Clearly, you wouldn't want the principal to do this on their own in isolation. The more collaborative this process can be and the more buy-in that exists within the staff, the better it's going to be, because as we go to create the plan, we want the staff to say, yeah, this really is where we're at. We don't want to have, and this is why that push-pull, tight-loose discussion we've had several times with you as a board about how directive are we. We want to be directive about the what, but not necessarily about the how. We want to give schools some opportunity to have some autonomy and buy-in into the how. So for the discussion purposes today, let's say that this is sufficient. I encourage schools not to spend a whole lot of time on this because this is really just a glance in the rearview mirror. It's not where we want to be in the future. We would, in just a moment, we're going to save and go to plan, but I want to turn the mic over to Travis for a second.
Yeah, just another way or another approach here. I know that in the schools in which I coached, I used this as an opportunity to leverage external audits or needs assessments from either, for example, my two schools had Burke needs assessments produced, and we actually took blocks of text out of those particular findings and copied and pasted them into different realities. So they embedded various findings and observations around student perception, staff perception, parent perception, community perception, et cetera, and we embedded those into the current level of development. So to the degree that we can use various types of data here in this section, I think it helps to inform, you know, where we are in relation to where we want to be. So those are other strategies that I know that there are some RAD external audits, et cetera, that could be utilized. There could be some language utilized and embedded in some of these particular current levels of development.
And I would, before we move on, Ben, I would speak to your question that you posted for the group. Are these all self-evals, or is the coach in a position of rendering some of these judgments? I think we start the process with the coach as a thought partner, asking probing questions that hopefully leads the school to where the coach might pass rendering judgment. We have not found that it's successful for the coach and or myself personally to sort of judge from afar what is or isn't working. I mean, it really comes back to trying to use those best teaching strategies to move the school community to where we know they need to be. I think the piece Travis used about the data, many of the surveys that we give as ongoing assessment metrics use things like staff perception surveys. So there are actually, or student perception surveys or community perception surveys. So there's actually measurable data that's collected that we can talk about in these plans that came from the opinions and feedback of the folks in the school community.
The other piece I just want to mention here, and in schools that I've the experience that I've coached, is we've actually returned to this area year to year and marked. So, for example, this represented 2015. We're currently, as noted, we would note 2014, and then at the close of the end of the 2014-15 year, I take it as an opportunity to huddle up with the leadership team and with other stakeholders within the group and to really sit down and talk about, well, where are we now? What's our current level of development? If we haven't arrived at fully implementing this indicator, what's 2015 look like? So we take it as an opportunity to have a kind of an ongoing historical narrative, and that may be a strategy that we encourage some of the coaches that we have in these grad schools.
Absolutely. Once this box is filled in, we save and go to plan. And the very first piece you're going to see here is the indicator at the top of the screen again. You'll see another link to the WISE ways, that if there was a need to reference that. First thing we're going to do is assign a team member to manage or monitor this work. And so one of the things that we coach schools on is we want enough people that are part of the game so that the principal isn't solely responsible for everything. You're not seeing anything in the drop-down menu because this is a test site, but typically everybody that's on the building leadership team or the department coordinators would be listed there by name. And then we go down to box number 2, and if we could get Indistar to change the label there and say SMART goal in blinking lights, this is where we want their SMART goal to be written. And so this would be the place where, after a good deal of deliberation, the faculty would articulate what their SMART goal is related to this indicator. And we're not going to go into this degree of detail with you today, but we actually have a SMART goal rubric that we provide to schools to measure these narratives against. So what we really want to see is we want to see a change in teacher practice. We want to see a change in student performance or outcome. We want to know what kind of professional development it's going to take to get that teacher practice to change. We want to know how much money it's going to take for PD, and we want to know how it's going to be sustained. And those 5 questions really guide the measurement and evaluation of this SMART goal rubric. So one of the things that's sort of interesting from a startup perspective is for all of our newly identified schools, this wouldn't be our RAD schools, but for our priority schools or focus schools that were just identified, the very first time they submit their plan is going to be next October. One of the first things we're going to do as a team is we'll go in and look at these and make sure that they meet our SMART goal rubric. Or if they don't, we actually can provide online feedback via coaching comments in this tool so that the next time the school pulls open their plan, they'll see that, oh my gosh, Ben Rarick read their plan, not really Ben, I know you don't have time to do that, but Ben Rarick read their plan and provided feedback on this specific SMART goal and really questioned how it is that they're going to pull off this professional development when they don't have budget aligned here. And so some of the questions that the board's asked about how we leverage our resources that we have to make sure that it's in alignment with the plan, this is sort of how it all comes together. And I think I'm going to stop here because I want to give a few minutes for questions. What I would tell you is that once this narrative is completed, the next step in this process is to create tasks that support this narrative. And the way I describe tasks is if this narrative is the blueprint for building the house, the tasks are going to be the step-by-step incremental parts that come before we see the finished product. So it's pouring the foundation, it's framing the house, it's hanging the drywall. And lots of times schools will ask, well, how many tasks do we need? When you look at the RAD plans on the 9th, you as a state and say, are we really sure that there's enough tasks here to make sure that this happens? And that's the absolute right question to ask. What we tell schools is that you should have enough tasks to make sure that your vision for how this indicator is going to look when it's fully implemented comes to life. And so in a 50-minute nutshell, that gives you a bit of sort of the framing of Indistar, what it is, what it's not, how the SMART goal process works, a little bit of work inside the plan. I want to look at Nate and Travis before we open it up for questions. Travis, anything else before we open it up for questions from the group? Nate, anything else? So at this time, I would just open it up for questions, and if you could just say who you are and ask your question orally, we'll try and answer.
Well, this is Holly Kuhn, and I have 2 questions, but they're pretty big questions, so I don't want to walk on anybody else's questions. Is there anyone else out there with questions?
How about Holly? Why don't you start with one of your first questions, Holly, and I can quickly tell you whether it's a short answer or it would be something that would be larger for discussion, but I'd love to get your question noted so that we can get back to you as a board.
Okay, that sounds great. So the first question I have is, looking at the example you've given around differentiation, and I'm thinking, I haven't looked at any of these plans, to look at what the steps would be, but I'm thinking about alignment to TPEP, and I'm thinking about how much of crossover there probably is, and I'm curious as coaches or training your coaches, how big of a focus is there on lining those things up? Because you're saying, is there enough steps to accomplish the plan? I think there's that opposite end of are there too many competing steps to accomplish the plan? So what kind of focus is there on lining those things up?
And Holly, I'm actually so glad that you asked that question because there's a huge piece that we didn't explicitly say out loud, which is this. We have worked super, super, super hard to make sure that the big rocks in our state, TPEP, and the implementation of Common Core is embedded in all this language. So as we would flush out that box where we talk about what the indicator looks like when it's fully met, we would be our coaches would be coaching the building to sort of add through the lens of your instructional framework. So we actually explicitly make those connections with folks in the field to ensure that what we're putting in this plan isn't contradictory and actually is complementary to everything that the school's already doing in relationship to TPEP and Common Core implementation. Further, we're actually coaching principals that if they build this plan well, that this plan becomes the principal's digital portfolio of evidence for their evaluation. So we're really trying to streamline all of the different big things that seem overwhelming into one super usable, manageable, and relevant tool that can help move the needle for our schools. So great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I see. So Ben asked a question, how have school principals reacted to the rollout of this tool? What praise, what criticism? Great question, Ben. I would tell you that for principals who see this as a compliance tool only, they don't like it because it's hard, it holds them accountable, and it's work. For principals who aren't skilled consensus builders, it's difficult for them to do this work. And I would suggest to you as a principal that led this work that the same things that would cause some principals to be frustrated quickly identifies for us what skills and talents the principals need to be more successful. Because you can't turn around an underperforming school if you can't get your staff to work together in an organized, concerted way. We have many, many schools across our state that love the tool, that are using the tool appropriately, that are getting good progress. We have many districts across the state who have adopted the use of the tool, not only for their identified schools, but for all the schools in their district. I've mentioned to Randy and would suggest to you, I'm not sure why we as a state don't expect that all of our schools use a common platform for the school improvement plans that they're all required to create. It seems odd to me, given the evolution through 5329, that we would allow people to do whatever it is that they want to do to respond to that school improvement planning process. But I would tell you, Ben, it hasn't been 100% good news. Our office, when people get frustrated with the process or struggle with it, our strategy is to go out into the field, and Travis and I or our coaches actually model the process with schools. And I'm really proud to say there has not yet been a school or a district that we've went and worked with side by side that it hasn't been positively received and viewed. Other questions other than Holly and or Ben, and if not, we'll come back and take some more of yours. Connie says, the amount of work seems overwhelming. How do school teams manage it all? Well, I agree with you, Connie. It is a huge amount of work, and I think that's why we've been so intentional in trying to bring those big rocks together. What we know about schools that are underperforming is that if they don't have a structure in place to come together and collaboratively work on their improvement, they will not get better. The days of a principal telling teachers what to do and them just doing it and school magically getting better are long gone. So many times the problem and what causes the structure to feel overwhelming is that the building doesn't have an internal structure for a leadership team to meet on a regular basis. And so that's one of the things that we coach schools to do, is to build that time, embed that time within their professional development schedule. It's part of what our money goes to pay for, is to compensate staff for time worked outside the contract day. It is overwhelming, but I think the smarter we get about how we do the work can relieve some of that load.
And I've got something to add to that, Andy. One of the pieces in working with school teams that we've found reduces the level of stress is when you begin to see the indicators in the work that you're already doing. So we're already all implementing TPEP. We're already all implementing Common Core. We have smarter balanced interim assessments, formative assessments, summative assessments coming. All of these various statewide initiatives are coming to a head in many of these buildings. And what we do in working with school teams, when we, for example, look at an indicator that said all teachers are developing standard aligned units of instruction. Well, what are we talking about in the state of Washington when we say that? We're talking about Common Core, and we're talking about next-gen science. So once teams begin to see that this is really about a structure that can help make coherent sense of the major initiatives that are out there, that previously may have been swirling in different directions, teams really begin to understand that this helps to increase the level of transparency. It provides a leverage point for principals to hold folks accountable, and it also helps to connect the work that we as a state are asked to do.
And Ben, I want to respond to a question you posted for the group that says, am I correct that this plan basically consolidates many of the federal plans? That's a clear selling point, yes. I would offer you two analogies. Could you imagine a human body that lived with no arteries, just a bunch of little veins? Or could you imagine trying to put out a huge structural fire with a whole bunch of garden hoses instead of a fire hose? And I think the point that you raised, Ben, is an excellent one. Historically, we as a state have these little cylinders or silos of funds. One of the best examples I would speak to is when I came to the agency, I was interested in finding out how much total dollars all of our schools had from all different inputs, all different fire hoses, all different veins. And what I found out was that we had mechanisms at OSPI to distribute funds to schools that, though they were certainly connected, we didn't talk about the money going out as part of the planning process. So one concrete example of that was our Title II money that's supposed to go out to the field for professional development of staff. A couple, 3 years ago, that money that flowed out, we never actually considered what that impact of those dollars were in our underperforming schools. And so the fusion, if you will, over time of the Title II plan with the Title I plan with the Title III bilingual plan, if we do this right, we're going to take a whole bunch of garden hoses that are ineffective in moving the needle for our kids and create some fire hoses where we've got the chance to actually raise the level of water for every kid in the state. That's really what our vision is. Any other questions out there?
Holly, did you have one more?
I did have one more, and it actually relates to Common Core. And you know, I look at some of the expected indicators, and I in my brain, in my teacher brain, I add the words relative to the standard. So, for example, you know, the teacher is pre-testing, post-testing, common lessons, common units, you know, relative to the CCSS. And I'm struggling to imagine what that looks like in most schools, because publishers claim that their curriculum are aligned to the CCSS, but I haven't seen one yet that really is aligned in terms of that upside-down planning piece. So if I look at pick a Common Core state standard, and I look at that standard, and yes, if I were to work my way through the whole entire curriculum over 6 or 7 units, that standard would have been addressed in pieces. But it's rare to find units of study or lessons that say this is the targeted standard, pre, post, deliver this material. So thinking about just the volume of work when your coaches go into a school, and that's how these schools will be assessed based on their test results for those standards. So when your coaches go into a school and they're looking at this and they're saying relative to the standards, how are they coaching people or dealing with that when the curriculum doesn't really, in terms of like upside down planning, connect directly to the standards much of the time?
Holly, that's a very, very good question, and it is multidimensional in what the response is, and it also largely depends on the district. It depends.
Yeah, it's a big question. That's what I said. It's a big question.
Yeah. but in essence, what you're getting to is does the system have a guaranteed viable curriculum in place? And part of our instructional services and supports in our core services that we offer are gap analyses. And gap analyses really,
which is helpful. Absolutely,
and you're probably well aware of what those are. Part of the work that we've done over the past 2 years and heading into the 3rd year, and I'm going to try to answer this in a roundabout way, is to seamlessly integrate the efforts of the leadership coach that is there on site, working shoulder to shoulder with the principal and the leadership teams, and in examining the needs that begin to surface when assessing the indicators and assessing where the teams are relative to being able to plan with standards aligned materials. If there's a huge gap that's identified, that becomes a bigger systems issue that then our instructional coaches are well equipped and readily poised to work collaboratively with on a systems level, both at a school level and on a systems level, around how to go about coming up with the right types of recommendations and analyzing really where the district is and where the gaps are. Also looking at student data relative to the standards and the gaps found therein. These are all, I mean, that is a huge question, and we find from varying degrees, as you say, there's no silver bullet. There, I mean, the teaching and learning department here at OSPI has been very clear that there is no one publisher that can claim that they own everything related to Common Core or are completely aligned. So really it's about bringing the teachers back to what the standards are and reflecting on what the materials are and where they are in their scope and sequence within that. And then how they're going about assessing that information both formatively in an iterative way and then in the summative components. So this is an ongoing struggle that we're finding, that in some systems where it could be out of a rural remote school where the curriculum director is also the 6th grade teacher, or if you're in a huge system like Tacoma where they have curriculum departments and directors, there are struggles and fractures in almost every system that we've encountered, and it's incredibly important to have the conversation be around the standard first, and then looking particularly at what the materials are ahead of you and where the students are relative to those standards. But that's a very good question, and I do believe that certainly we aren't where we want to be in terms of creating the full systemic readiness to benefit from Common Core because of the reasons that you've just articulated, that there isn't one publisher that can claim that, but hopefully we'll be moving in the right directions by keeping discussions focused on what matters most.
Great, thanks.
I know we're past our hour that we predicted. Any last minute comments?
I just want to say thank you to Nate and Andy and Travis for the thorough presentation. I appreciate everyone taking the time this afternoon to be part of this conversation, and I'm just going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
That was great. Thanks.